Brian, when we hear that President Obama is sending 3,000 troops over, they'll be building hospitals. It takes years to build a hospital. Is it going to be too late?
I certainly hope not. I think that this is exactly the kind of response that we've been sort of looking for. We need to get as many people over there and resources as possible. I think Ebola is sort of a slow-moving disease, and the situation has deteriorated greatly in the last couple of weeks, and so any sort of response now is still going to head off something that would be much worse later on down the road.
Brian, where would you fault the response to Ebola thus far? What's the weak link in the chain?
I don't know if I would fault anyone. I think that the situation on the ground there is very challenging to work in, and I think that several weeks ago, I've been following this for almost 2 months now, we're all very hopeful that the increased international attention that had been spent there, many of the resources that had been sent over there would be able to make a dent. But unfortunately, in the last couple of weeks, we've not seen that. And I think that just stepping it up is the appropriate thing to do at this point.
Stepping it up to what level? When you read the headlines of what President Obama is doing, do you feel that it's significant enough?
Indeed, I think I've not been able to see the full details of that, but I think indeed a military scale sort of operation is something that is called for in this situation. I think the epidemic has just continued to get out of control. The cornerstones of good infection control require excessive amounts of manpower and resource, and to some degree the military is the appropriate way to deliver that. That said, a lot of the situation on the ground there has to do with public distrust. There's a lot of fear involved with authority figures, and so how that is handled needs to be dealt with very carefully, I think.
So what's most responsible for the scale of the outbreak thus far? The lack of manpower and resources to combat the spread of Ebola, or some of the cultural aspects unique to this part of Africa, the burial traditions, for example, and, to your point, the mistrust of authority?
Yeah, I think it's multifactorial. I mean, really, this is an outbreak of unprecedented size for Ebola. We've seen many Ebola outbreaks in the past, but generally they sort of peter out after about this time. And in this part of the world, the population is a little bit more mobile. It's also located in very highly populated areas, which is something that's unique for this outbreak as well. And given the way that this spreads and the excessive sort of time that's been able to fester, I think that's what sort of let it get a little bit out of control. I think the folks on the ground have been doing a fantastic job, but the resources that they've had available and just the speed at which this epidemic has been taking off has been hard to keep up with.
Brian, right now, Ebola is still spreading, or at least this outbreak of Ebola is spreading via bodily fluids. As an expert in infectious diseases like this, what do you give the chances, what chance would you give to this virus evolving to such a degree that it could spread through the air, aerosol contact, effectively?
Yeah, so Ebola is a disease that's very difficult to study, and so unfortunately we don't know a great deal about it. However, as a virus, is not particularly well set up for rapid evolution. However, like all pathogens, the longer that it's able to stay inside of the human host, the longer it has to adapt to that host every time that it gets transmitted from one person to another. You're rolling the dice again that a mutation may occur that could be particularly difficult for people on down the line. It might cause the disease to get worse. That said, we do know how to control these outbreaks. We need to just isolate patients, need to follow their contacts, and then we need to increase our ability to properly dispose of those who have of the deceased. And those are the cornerstones of good public health response. This disease requires intimate contact with these bodily fluids. It's not highly transmissible. So I think the prospects for control are good. I think that we just need to treat this problem very seriously right now.
Then just couch it for us. For many of us who are here who aren't necessarily haunted by the New York Times article, who are saying, this isn't a problem in my backyard, what do you think the percentage chance is this could become airborne? Because if it does, then it is our problem.
Yeah. I'm very hesitant to put any sort of percentage on it. All I will say is that the quicker we respond to this and get it under control, the lower those chances are. And I think that Ebola in the United States context is very different than Ebola in Western Africa. The access to health care and the levels of sanitation we have here makes the probability of transmission very, very low.
Brian, is there a precedent that we should look to? A disease that was spreading through contact like bodily fluid before that evolved to such a point where there was aerosol transmission?
For a disease like Ebola with such a high lethality, I don't really think there is. I think that the one precedent I could point to is that many of the theories with 1918 influenza were related to many people being transmitted for a long period of time in the trench warfare, etc.